So the bike's now at about 1,000 miles, and I'm going to go ahead and consider the Takegawa 143 big bore kit broken in. It was a pretty uneventful break-in process. The fact that you were supposed to keep it at 5,000 RPM for the first couple hundred miles was pretty painful, because with the current gearing, I'm getting about 45 miles an hour when I'm at 5,000 RPM, and that can be difficult to get around town without being that slow guy on a scooter that people are honking at 45 miles an hour, when most of the streets around here have a speed limit of 45 or 50 or 55 even. So that was kind of difficult and boring to do, but wanted to break it in as carefully as possible. Over the last couple of days though, as I got it to the 200-mile point, I started to run it harder and harder, and today I decided I might as well see what it can actually do. I actually did run into a problem yesterday where I started to push it more than I had before. I was going over a causeway here in Florida. There aren't too many hills, but the bridges are the one areas that you're able to actually put some load on the engine. And as I was going over one of these bridges, doing about 60 miles an hour, when I got to the top of the bridge, like right near the peak, I suddenly got a big drop in power. It felt like I'd lost all fuel or something. So I pulled over and I noticed quite a bit of smoke coming out of the breather filter. I mean, kind of billowing out. Turned the engine back on and started driving again. Didn't have any problems at all. So not exactly sure what happened, but I figured that as long as it was running fine, that maybe it was just part of the braking process. I wasn't really sure. So I rode for a few more miles and then came back on the other direction on that same causeway. And almost at the same point, when I got to the peak at about 60 miles an hour with that much load on the engine, got a huge drop in power and the billowing smoke again. So I got back to the house and took a look at everything. One of the things that I noticed was that my oil level was pretty high, and I had initially done that intentionally because I thought by adding the oil cooler that I needed to put additional oil so that when oil was sitting here in the cooler, it wasn't starving the engine itself from having the oil it needs. But I think that may have been the problem that I had, because too much oil in the engine can cause overpressurization, which my guess is had something to do with the smoke coming out the breather tube. So I very carefully pulled about a quart of oil out of the engine. I just used a syringe connected to a hose so that I didn't have to take out the drain plug, since it's always a mess when you're trying to take out that small amount of oil without again having oil go everywhere and making a mess. So I pulled out about a quart of oil. It's now sitting right above the bottom line, and I went ahead and did the same run today that I did yesterday and had the problem. So going over the causeway, I actually pushed it a little harder than I did yesterday. I was doing I think close to 70 as I was coming over the bridge, and in the same peaks where I had the problems yesterday, no problem, no power drop. I did see the faintest bit of smoke coming out of the breather filter, but I'm not sure, that may have just been residual from whatever the issue was yesterday. Anyway, turned around, came right back over the same causeway again, trying to push it hard, and didn't have any problems with power. Did notice again when I came to a stop afterwards, just the faintest bit of smoke coming out of it, but nothing that seemed to be problematic, and most importantly, no power loss when I was going both directions. So I continued to ride the bike around for a while in varying levels of power. I decided, actually, since I was pushing it as hard as I can, I might as well see what the bike can actually do from a top speed perspective. So going down 95, this time I actually got it up to 81 miles an hour, and I felt like the bike actually had a little more to go. I was in a situation where there was a lot of traffic and I only wanted to be on the freeway for a single exit. So I had to move over to the second lane to pass a bunch of other cars, and I got a lot of funny looks because a bike this small, passing other cars over 80 miles an hour, I imagine looks pretty strange from their perspective. But yep, was able to get it to 81 miles an hour, which matched both on the speedo and the GPS that I had on the bike, which I'm pretty happy with. At 81 miles, over 80 miles an hour, that's plenty fast enough for this bike. Although, who knows, I'm going to still look to see what other modifications I can do to continue to improve power, just for the fun of it. Obviously, it's not practical at this point, but this bike hasn't really been practical at any point in the build. The best thing about this Takegawa kit, though, is how it's really normalized the power band across the entire RPM range. So the cam that I put into the bike, that gave me a lot of power at the top end, but the low end was still pretty limited. So I put in the 14-tooth front sprocket to give me a little bit of more punch at the beginning, but that obviously limited the maximum speed on the other end. But with the Takegawa kit giving me more bottom end power, I switched the front sprocket back to a 15-tooth. So now I have the power on the low end and the top speed on the upper end. All right, so after all that and convincing myself that it was probably just too much oil that led to too much pressure, that led to the smoke coming out of the breather filter, I let the curiosity get the best of me and decided I might as well tear into the engine just to make sure. So I pulled everything off, was taking a look at things, and when I got to the piston, I noticed a couple of little pieces of metal, and I was like, oh man, that's probably not good. And as I was going around it, I noticed a lot of scoring at the top and the bottom, but most importantly, right here, there's a big chunk missing. So I'm not sure what the order of operations were that caused this problem. I'm sure it happened, well, I assume it happened yesterday. I'm actually not certain of that. It was yesterday that I noticed that big loss of power when I was going all out. It could have been that at the very initial break-in of this happened. I'd be surprised if everything was nice and smooth up until that 200th mile where it decided to somehow chunk out here in this front section. It could be that when I was pushing it yesterday, I was going up that hill, and maybe it was because there's too much oil that caused too much pressure that somehow blew by something and somehow chunked this out. I guess it could have been that I was putting so much pressure on it that, again, I don't know how you just missed that piece of metal there, unless it was the piston itself was out of round originally and somehow it just finally knocked itself off. Anyway, regardless, the big bore kit project so far is unsuccessful. It actually was running, like I said, and like you saw, pretty well. Got me up over 80 miles an hour, and that's great. If it weren't for the fact that I was still hearing some weird sound in the engine that, again, helped me decide that I might as well tear into it and be sure of what's actually going on. So, not exactly sure where to go from here. I don't really feel like putting the old one back on. I'm either going to buy another piston on the 143 size for Takegawa. That's about $150 from Hard Racing. The walls of the cylinder actually look pretty good, so I don't think I need to replace the cylinder, just the piston, but at $150, that's kind of pricey to do the same thing. I'm partially inclined just to try a different big bore kit. Koso has the 170, which looks interesting, and at least then I'm doing something new and not trying to do something that I already did. Regardless, I'm going to have to go through that braking process again, which was a pain. So we'll see. And I just finally got this 143 logo here on the bike looking so nice. I guess that's more reason to stay with 143, but I have a vinyl cutter, so I could just make it say 170 or something else if I decided to go with another kit. So stay tuned as I figure out how to sort out this big bore kit problem. Thanks. Not sure why this creepy van's here hanging out. Oh shit, it's a sheriff. Great. Smile and wave.